So I'd like to teach you all about the mindset of Fpass Mark II. So Fpass Mark II is a really cool second generation monetary policy framework that eliminates a lot of the problems with local approximations and baseline projections. So problem with baseline projections is that people have way too much confidence in them. And when we think about policymaking and so on, the idea that a bunch of policymakers would try to tell you that they know something about the future is very uncertain, as we have seen over the last couple of decades. I would say going all the way back to even the global financial crisis in 2008 and so on. So the world is very uncertain. People are recognizing that central banks are actually developing new frameworks. The Central Bank of Armenia was the first central bank on the planet to develop this second generation. And so you can read about the whole history of developing that framework, as well as how it's implemented and as well as how it's been going since it was implemented in January of 2024. So they've had almost a year and a half of actually doing it instead of just talking about it like many of the advanced economies have. Today, what I'm going to do is to try to get you into the mindset of how I teach my students about how to think about the future. Okay, so under FPass Mark One, it would all be about telling a story about what I think is going to happen, and of course, that story hopefully wouldn't be too convincing because many things could happen. Everyone should have their own kind of views about all the possible things that could happen. But what I'm going to do talk about is the recent stuff. Uh, and I'm going to ask a question this way. Would I be surprised a year from now if the Fed and everybody else realized that inflation was a much bigger problem than they had realized, and so on? And so that's what we call like a scenario. So in other words, it's not something that I'm prepared to bet the farm on, as it would say back where I grew up. But but that there is uh, a significant possibility that that interest rates might end up being higher than what is currently priced in financial markets and so on. So this is what we call in FPass Mark II, or what Alan Greenspan called the prudent risk management approach to monetary policy. This is something we need to worry about because after we learn about things like the neutral rate and the natural rate of unemployment and what inflation expectations are, and not only what the direct effects of what tariffs are, but what the indirect effects are, what will be the effect on inflation. Now, this graph, I'm just trying to draw a parallel between what's happening today and what was happening in the 2000 uh, tech boom bust cycle. And so on the left-hand side, you can see I'm charting unemployment and so on. It's a green dash line, and you can see it was uh, it was about kind of where it is now in the low kind of 4% numbers and stuff. And you can see the unemployment rate. We got a tech bust. The stock market crashed. They were clearly overpriced in the Nasdaq and so on. And so we got this big, significant recession where the unemployment rate basically went up to 6%. So it went up by 2 percentage points. And that was enough. And this is going to be a very important part of the story. If and you don't have to believe it. I remember I told you it's only one of other scenarios. But I'm plotting two measures of inflation here. One, the red dash line, which is the Atlanta Fed sticky price measure of inflation. And so these are I apologize for the name sticky, uh, but these are an aggregation over all the prices that are typically set infrequently. So you can imagine things like the price of rental accommodation, which is typically a contract of 1 year length. So you can imagine a person setting that price. That person is going to look at uh, what has been going on recently and setting prices on typical apartments like that one, as well as what one thinks is going to happen in the future. Uh, is there excess demand for those apartments, and does the person think that they're entering an inflationary environment and so on? And so once inflation expectations become entrenched in the expectations of those types of wage and price setters, it can take fairly significant unemployment. In this case, an unemployment rate going to 6% for inflation, as measured by these stickier prices in the economy. Again, the red line is the Atlanta Fed sticky price measure of inflation, but most of that is captured by service prices. So I've also plotted in the blue line service price inflation. So you can see it took basically 6% unemployment to basically get both of those measures of inflation down into the 2.5% range and so on. And so you fast forward and you go, well, geez, that's almost exactly where we are today. And so the question is, does the unemployment rate need to rise to 6% to actually bring these sticky prices, service price inflation, and this Atlanta Fed measure of sticky price inflation down to numbers that would be consistent with the Fed achieving a 2% target and so on. And so what that trade-off, if the Phillips curve is really, really flat, the Fed, if it really truly cares about inflation and inflation rising significantly and durably above its target, in other words, risking losing credibility and having a bad reaction in the bond market, in equity markets, effectively a crisis in confidence that could result in a massive correction in asset prices and equity prices in particular. So that's my contribution to today. What if something like this were to happen? And again, Fpass Mark II is not just about one particular scenario. We also have to worry about other scenarios, including the ones that Governor Waller is concerned about, where inflation expectations suddenly decline, unemployment rises quickly, and we go back to a world where the economy gets stuck in a low inflation trap. So that today is not really on my radar screen, on my immediate radar screen, but I think that my judgment as a policymaker would be that I would worry a bit more about the case A types of scenarios than the case B scenarios. But the whole idea of the prudent risk management approach is that one can have different views and one can have a different objective function to evaluate those different possibilities. So thank you. I hope you